Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Talking the talk or serious and meaningful negotiations? This is the question always asked when it comes to the Western powers' approach to Iran's nuclear program. Soon, the two sides will meet again in search of mutual agreement. Are there too many red lines and toxic history for this to happen? And who really needs to unclench a fist? To Crosstalk Iran's nuclear program, I'm joined by Mohammad Marandi in Tehran. He is a professor at the University of Tehran. In Tampa, we have Majid Rafizadeh. He is a foreign policy expert and president of the International American Council. And in Washington, we cross to Gareth Porter. He is an investigative historian and journalist. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want. Professor Marandi in Tehran, if I can go to you first. The two parties are going to meet in Kazakhstan. What's different this time round, if anything?
Well, I don't think much has changed. The United States has increased pressure on Iran. It has increased sanctions. That has had a negative effect on ordinary Iranians. The fact that senior government officials, including the former Secretary of State, have said that the sanctions are there to force, to put pressure on ordinary Iranians to bring about change, I think in Iran is seen as something quite uncivilized and inhuman to try to hurt ordinary civilians to put pressure on the government. I don't think it's going to change. I have no doubt that it will not change the policy of the Iranian government. So in general, nothing has changed. The Iranians feel that there's a general an assault on the country, cyber attacks, scientists being assassinated, the Iranian central bank being shut down by the Europeans and the Americans, thus making it difficult to even import or export medicine and foodstuff. And because of a shortage of some medicines, people have died. So Iranians feel blood is on the hands of the Americans and the EU. Under such circumstances, the Iranians feel that they really cannot give anything at the negotiating table because the Europeans and the Americans will interpret this as a sign of weakness. So the Iranians are going to wait and see if the Europeans and the Americans make any reasonable change in their policy.
Okay, Majid, in Tampa, do the Americans go there with good intentions? Do they really want an agreement, or is it just talk the talk?
Well, I'm just going to compare a little bit this administration with the previous one. I think this administration, we can say, I think it's been more willing to negotiate with the Iranian government. When the Obama administration came to power, I think they extended their hand. They sent letters to the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, and I think they didn't get responses. I think they tried to use diplomacy track too. I think they'd be more willing than previous administration to use, I think, to engage Iran in conversation. But I think the problem here, I think it's more deep. I think we can't just cherry pick this event and focus on this event. I think we have to look at the broader context and what is happening. I think the underlying principles of the Islamic Republic of Iran and the reason for its raison d'etre and for its survival, it's the enmity toward the United States. I think the Iranian government cannot afford having relationship and engage with the United States. And the reason is that if they have relationship with the United States, that would mean that they cannot suppress and they cannot crack down on the opposition inside the country by labeling them American conspirators or foreign American-backed groups. I think one of the strategies that the Iranian government have been used. I mean, I grew up in that country. I worked there. I studied there. And besides just academic work, I have experience of living in that country. I think the Iranian government, in order to survive, they need the enemy to call United States as the enemy. Otherwise, if they make that relationship, I think that will endanger the survival of the regime. So they will use the engagement policies. What they've been using, the recent talking about the engagement policy is more, I think, a tactical, I think, strategy in order just to buy time. I think the Iranian government is very, I think, become masterful at manipulating.
It happened in like the 6 minutes of the program, buying time. Gareth, go ahead, jump in.
Well, yeah, I would also think that we need to take a longer historical perspective on this current situation of talks on the nuclear program. And the only difference that I have is that I think you have to begin with the radical imbalance of power between the United States and Iran as the key factor that has shaped the diplomacy between the two countries from the beginning. Now, you know, I understand that there was a lot of hostility over the Shah, particularly in 1979, and that created ill will from the very beginning. But over the last 30 years, I think we have to understand that fundamentally it has been the preponderance of power of the United States over Iran and its overconfidence that it could coerce Iran with that hegemonic power that has really been at the root of the problem all along. That is to say, the problem of diplomacy with regard to the nuclear issue. I'm writing a book on this right now, and what has struck me in my research is the degree to which the United States government, particularly since 2001, but I would say going back to the Clinton administration, has had this overweening self-confidence that it could coerce Iran because the Iranians must be afraid of American military power. And of course, this was particularly true during the Bush administration when they invaded and occupied Iraq. I have several sources who've told me that the Bush administration was extremely overconfident, and that's why they made no effort whatsoever to negotiate. They refused to negotiate at all with Iran, despite the fact, and here I differ with Majid on the idea that Iran refuses engagement with the United States. The Bush administration refused to even consider or accept, to acknowledge the receipt of the 2003 diplomatic initiative, and that could have indeed begun a very meaningful interaction, in my view. So I think that's really the fundamental problem. It's
well, I'd like to jump in here. Mohammed, I think it's very interesting is that the Americans don't want to legitimize the regime in Tehran. That's it. It's the other way around.
Yes, I think it's quite obvious. I mean, first of all, when Mr. Obama became president and he spoke about talking to Iran, the Iranian leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, said, while he explained the grievances that Iran had from the coup d'etat in 1953, the support for the Shah, chemical weapons for Saddam Hussein, and so on, he said, if the United States changes, we will change. He was very clear on that. And we've had previous experiences in Iran with the United States. During Mr. Rafsanjani's period as president, the Iran's awarded Conoco a contract in the Persian Gulf, an oil field. The United States slapped Iran with sanctions. In Afghanistan, Iran spoke with the United States. Then Iran was labeled the axis of evil. When the Brazilian president and the Turkish prime minister came to Tehran with a letter from Obama stating the conditions in which he would agree with a negotiated settlement with Iran, and the Iranians and the Turks and the Brazilians within that framework signed the Tehran Declaration, immediately Obama went back and imposed sanctions on Iran and basically slapped the Brazilians and the Turks in the face. So the Iranians have on numerous occasions tried to find a solution to the problems with the United States, but it's been the United States that has basically behaved aggressively and irrationally in response. The Iranians feel that the problem really is that the United States has never come to the recognition of Iran as an independent country with an independent foreign policy, and that the United States is fearful that this virus would spread throughout the Middle East. Now, right now, the Iranians are willing to resolve the situation, but the problem is that the United States is carrying out all sorts of hostile actions against Iran. In fact, the United States is now, and the EU, is now blocking Iranian television stations in Persian, Arabic, English, and Spanish across the globe. Eurosat, AsiaSat, all of these have stopped broadcasting Iranian television. So the Iranians are no longer even allowed to speak out. Press TV and other TV channels are no longer allowed to be viewed in the United States. So American hostility really has gone to extraordinary extremes.
Okay, Majid, do you want to reply to that in Tampa?
Well, first of all, I mean, there are a lot of points that I want to reply, but I think we don't have the time. But first of all, when we talk about the sanctions, it's we're just saying United States. It's not just the United States. It's an international consensus. Even Russia, China, 4 rounds of sanctions that have been international consensus. And second of all, when the WikiLeaks came out,
let's just be clear here. Not all countries have the same sanctions. Okay, not all countries have the same sanctions. Let's just be clear. Okay, go ahead.
I mean, the U.S. has unilateral sanctions, but I think the 4 rounds of robust sanctions, there have been international consensus. But I think the point is that I was talking about the WikiLeaks. I mean, we saw that regional countries, except Syria, regional countries, they express their concerns about Iran's hegemonic ambitions in the region. They express their concerns about Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapon capabilities. And
well, those are in many cases, those are just opinions. They're just opinions, okay? They're not necessarily facts.
So they were, it's not opinion. I mean, they were pushing the United States to really address this problem. I think, can we say all these countries in the region are wrong? All these 4 rounds of sanctions that done by all 5 members of United are wrong, and the Iranian government.
Majid, can I just
Gareth, go ahead and jump in before we go to the break. Gareth, go ahead before the break. Go ahead.
Yeah, on this point of the attitudes of Arab people in the Middle East toward the Iranian nuclear program, I think it's pertinent here to point out that opinion polls that were done by the PIPA people at the University of Maryland have shown that a clear majority of Arabs around the Middle East who were polled.
Gareth, let me jump in here. Gentlemen, I'm going to have to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Iran. Stay with RT. Okay, Gareth, I'd like to go back to you. I had to cut you off before the break. Go ahead and finish your point, and then I want to talk about what negotiations should really be about. Go ahead.
Yes, thanks. I was just saying that it seems very pertinent to point out that opinion polls taken by a U.S. polling organization over the last few years have shown that a clear majority of Arabs have regarded that Iran has an absolute right to its nuclear program. They disagree with the policy of the United States and its allies on this issue. So I don't think that it's really quite accurate to simply take a broad brush on this question of the views from the Middle East on Iran's nuclear program.
Okay, Mohammed, I'd like to let's change the subject here. I mean, what can Iran give up that it hasn't already given up? Because I've always had the perception the Americans want Iran just to simply surrender. Then we'll have an agreement.
Well, I'll answer this, but I just quickly have to say that the international community actually supports Iran because the non-aligned movement consists of 3/5 of the countries of the world. And from the very beginning of this issue, a decade ago, they have repeatedly supported Iran's position, and they've opposed all sanctions. And as you pointed out, most of the very harsh sanctions that are directed at ordinary people are American and EU sanctions. But I think with regards to what Iran would have to give up, the Iranians, I think, are quite willing to open up, to give more, be more open about their nuclear program, to allow more intrusive inspections. But the problem is that the Iranians don't see an end game. The United States constantly wants Iran to give concessions and to give nothing in return, and that's what we saw in the Tehran Declaration. For example, for 2 years, Iran completely halted nuclear enrichment and allowed intrusive inspections and effectively accepted the additional protocol. And after 2 years, all of the major issues between Iran and the IAEA were resolved under Mr. Al-Baradei. In fact, right now, the Parchin complex, which is being discussed, was already visited twice by IAEA inspectors, and they were able to visit wherever they wanted to, and they discovered nothing. But after 2 years of cooperation, the Iranians got nothing in return, just more pressure and more expectations from the West. So what the Iranians are saying is that the West basically has to make the first step. They have to show goodwill. If they show goodwill, then the Iranians will take a step forward, and a step-by-step approach will resolve the issue. But the Iranians believe that the United States and the Europeans simply are not serious.
Majid, is there any goodwill in Washington?
Well, I think we can say that the United States foreign policy is a pragmatic, foreign policy. They've been able to make a relationship with China.
Oh, come on. The invasion of Iraq. The invasion of Iraq.
I think
perfect example. Go ahead.
I think, but just going to the point, I think they have made relationship with China. I think they come to China. So I don't think there is really any negative sides from the United States. I think it's the Iranian government that, again, I said they can't afford having relationship with Iran. And I just, if I can go back just on one of the points that your guest mentioned, I think it's we're talking about some of the things that Iran should give up. I think one of the things that it's just the basic human rights that we're talking about. I think we're talking about just if Iran can really respect, I think, the aspiration of people. I think if they can stop executing gays, if they can stop stoning people for adultery, if they can, if they can just allow people to have freedom of speech. I mean, we're talking about basic human rights.
Can Iran give up these things? Maybe if Tehran does that, maybe they'll stop the droning program. Would that be fair? Killing innocent people?
Well, Iran will not stop.
Why is human rights always used here? It's hypocritical. It's hypocritical.
Well, because many Iranian people have been killed in this way.
Human rights are not going to be raised by the United States under any circumstances. That's simply not going to happen. I think that's extraneous to the issue. It has never been a factor in U.S. policy in the Middle East under any circumstances. It's not going to be now, and it shouldn't be under the present circumstances. We need to focus on finding a fair, just, and reasonable solution to this problem of the nuclear
And Gareth, what would that be, Gareth? What would that be, Gareth? What's your formula?
Well, I think that there's been an awful lot of literature laying out a reasonable proposal or a set of reasonable proposals for a solution by a lot of people outside the U.S. government. They've all said that first of all, the United States is going to have to recognize the right to enrich. And in return, Iran is going to have to agree to limitations on how much and at what level it can enrich, and of course agree to very stringent conditions in terms of IAEA surveillance. And again, I agree with Dr. Marandi that the Iranians have signaled more than once the willingness to agree to that kind of solution. And the details can be worked out if the United States is really ready to make a deal. I think, again, I go back to the fundamental point that I make, that the Obama administration is still sort of caught with the legacy of the past in terms of U.S. policy toward Iran, which is a policy that, in fact, does not acknowledge the legitimate interests of Iran in the process of making proposals. It simply has never been allowed that Washington, in fact, recognizes that Iran does, in fact, have legitimate interests in the Middle East. It has legitimate interests in self-defense and in basically being accepted as a player, a seat at the table, if you will, in Middle Eastern politics. That has been denied systematically over the years. I think that's still the problem with the Obama administration, even though one can hope, one can always hope that that can change, and the departure of Dennis Ross certainly is a positive, but the fact that the White House apparently still continues to have conversations with Dennis Ross is quite a negative in that regard.
Mohammad, everything that Gareth just said, you said the Iranian government agrees to, more or less.
Yeah, I think that it's obvious that the Iranians are quite willing to cooperate within the framework of the NPT and the regulations of the IAEA. Iran does not want any rights beyond those that exist in international law, and they will not accept anything less. And I think that the problem with the United States has nothing to do with human rights. Iran has a constitution. America's closest allies in the region, like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, do not even have a constitution. They do not even have elections. Iran has elections. Just recently, you had rallies throughout the country on the anniversary of the revolution. There was a high turnout. This sort of thing is quite clear. I mean, if we want to speak about human rights, drone attacks is just the tip of the iceberg. The United States invaded Iraq, Afghanistan. They helped create a civil war in Syria. With the help of NATO, they destroyed the infrastructure in Libya. Now we see what's going on in Mali. The atrocities that Israel commits in Lebanon and in Gaza. The siege of Gaza for years was supported by the United States and the EU, basically preventing people from being able to eat and properly and to have medicine. So, and I personally am a survivor of 2 chemical attacks during the Iran-Iraq war. These chemicals were provided to Saddam Hussein by EU countries, EEC countries at the time, and the United States. The technology and the support, the UN Security Council blocked any condemnation of Iraq. So, the crimes that have been created against humanity, when it comes, is really, we have to look to Europe and the United States to see the real culprits. And whereas the Iranians have never engaged in an attack, Iran never even used chemical weapons when chemical weapons were used against Iran. Iran never even produced chemical weapons. So I think that at the end of the day, it's quite obvious that the United States, its policy towards Iran is based upon an irrational form of hatred. And I think that unless people begin to speak out against this sort of policy, the United States may once again attempt to drag the region into greater crisis. The Iranians don't believe that the United States will attack Iran again because the United States is on the decline. They have economic crises in Europe and the United States. People are tired of war. But pushing for greater confrontation at a time when the whole Middle East is in political uproar is something that no sensible leader would pursue. Yet so far we see no sign that the United States wants to behave more humanely towards Iran and more reasonably.
Majid, go ahead, jump in.
Well, about the Syria, I think I'm half Syrian, so I was in Syria. I did research in Syria, and I studied Syria too. I think there is no doubt that one of the reasons that the civil war is exacerbating is Iranian support for the regime. I think there is no doubt about that. I think I grew up in these 2 most notorious governments of Assad and Ali Khamenei. I think when we're talking about democratic, they say democratic. Iran is a democratic government. I think if the Guardian Council from the beginning, if you're not supporting the Islamic law, they will strip you away from the election. Second of all, I think Ali Khamenei in the constitution, the president is not the powerful person in the country. The powerful person is Ali Khamenei. He has the rights to veto, to abolish, to postpone, to suspend any laws in the country. I think this is called some sort of
okay, we're getting a little off topic here.
The Constitution.
Gareth,
you haven't read the Constitution.
Gareth, I give Gareth the last word. Who has the clenched fist here?
Well, it's clear that the United States has the bigger clenched fist and the longer lasting clenched fist, the one that goes back farther. And I would, there's one way in which I differ from Dr. Marandi's analysis, and that is that I don't think that this is fundamentally about irrational hatred by the United States. I think that it is related fundamentally to the needs of the national security state of the United States, by which I mean the Pentagon.
I'm going to have to jump in here. There's not a difference there. Gentlemen, thank you much for a fascinating discussion. Many thanks today to my guests in Washington, Tampa, and in Tehran. And I want to thank the viewer for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, crosstalk rules. I love you.